Hi, grade 11. So in this activity, we're looking at the Maths Calc application, activity 3.2 of the grade 11 textbook. It's about arrays, and it's a super important activity because it really includes some of the very important algorithms that you must know. In other words, what I'm talking about is how to display values from an array, how to calculate the average, how to sum the values, something like determining the product, the highest and lowest values in that array, and some other calculations, like in this case calculating percentage of the values. So it's really very important, especially this one of the average and the range, that which is the difference between the highest and lowest values. So I've already written the code for the display. You should be familiar with this. So we're just going to loop through the array. Remember, we've got a global array declared here. Array marks. It's an array indexed from 1 to 10 of integer, and it is already assigned fixed values when the program starts up as here. Okay, so 10 integer values, and the array is called array marks. So if we want to display it, we'll just do a for loop going for I going from 1 to 10, and then we'll do red out.lines.add array marks I. But because it's integers, we do into string. So just quickly run that. And there we display our integers. Now to get the average. So to get the average of a number of marks, we need to add them together and then divide by how many numbers we have. So if you have, for example, in maths this term, you had 2 tests. To get the average, you add the 2 tests together and then divide the answer by 2. So we're going to first sum them together. So we need an integer to store that. Okay. So we are going to loop through the array for I going from 1 to, we can either say 10 or the length of array marks. Doesn't really matter. And we're going to just stick to a convention, begin and end. And what we're going to do is we're going to add array marks value I. We're going to add it onto I sum. So I sum must be I sum plus what is an array marks at that position I while we're looping through it. And it is a great idea to initialize I sum to 0. It's not going to make a huge difference in this calculation, but it is a good idea. So you start I sum being 0, and then you just, let's just stick to our decent camel case there. I sum is I sum plus the value that is in array marks at position I. Right, so after we've completed the loop and added all the numbers together, we can now get the average. Now usually average would be a real. It's possible for averages to end up being integers, but most of the times they are real. So let's call it R average as a real. And our average is going to be I sum divided by 10, or by the length of the array. Let's just stick to the easy option here. We know we've got 10 numbers, so let's keep it simple. Right, so that's the average. It's the sum of all the numbers divided by the number of numbers that we have, the count, in other words. You could also have a counter if you didn't know how many, you weren't sure how many values were in that array. You could have an I count integer, and as you step through, I count must also start off by being 0, and as you step through, I count can be I count plus 1. And then your average would be the sum divided by I count. Now we display that already out. Dot lines dot add and some text. average, and then we add concatenate on. We want to show our average, but remember our average is currently a real, so we'll have to do a float to string on our average. Right, so this is very important and it's very simple, and you can be guaranteed some marks in a test or exam if you know how to do this. So to display the values and then get the average, which was 33. Okay, so the next thing is to find the product of all the numbers. The product of the numbers is the answer you get when you multiply them all by each other. So it's going to be something similar. So we'll have a variable that will store that product, and it will also be an integer, because if we times these integer values with each other, the answer is also always going to be an integer. So we're going to loop for I going from 1 to 10. I'm going to press Control D often. I hope you also start using Control and D to quickly format your indent your code text as you go along. So for I going from 1 to 10, the product is going to be the answer that we have times by the number. So I product is I product times by array marks in position I. Okay, but now this time it's very important that we actually do initialize the product, and the best thing to use is a 1. So because when we get our first number in array marks, if we times that by an initial value of 1, that will give us the first mark. Anything times by 1 stays the same. So when I is 1, when we go into the loop the first time, our product is going to be 1 times the first element of the array. And then when the loop continues, our next time it's going to be what it is. The product is going to be what the product answer was in the previous run times by the second element in the array. So we start off with the product being 1, and then we times the answer by the next element in the array each time. And that's it. And then we do our output. Plus, it's going to be an into string this time. Of I product. And there we have it. Okay, so happy with that? Start off with the product being 1, loop through the array, and times our product is multiplied by each element in the array as we go along, and that is how we keep on, multiplying all of the numbers with each other. Right, what's next? The highest and lowest in order to get the range. So this is super important. You're going to be asked this so often. So what we do is, for variables, we'll have to have our high number and our low number. And in this question, they also ask us to display the position of the high and the low. So let's keep I position of the high number and I position of the low number. They're going to be integers. Right, so now we're going to integer. We are going to loop through our array, and we're going to look for the highest number. And how will we do that? We do that by making the first number the highest as well as the lowest. Okay, so let's say our I high is going to get array marks position 1. The first element is going to start off by being the highest, and then we're going to loop through and compare it each time until to look for a number that's bigger than our current high. So the high one starts off being the by being array marks first element, and the high position position of the high number is going to be 1. And then similarly, I low, we're going to start off by making array marks first element. It's going to be our lowest number to start off with, and I position of the low is going to be array marks. It's going to be 1, the first position. Right. Now we loop through our array for I going from the second to 10, because we've already used the first one as our high and low, begin and end, Control D to get our spacing right. Right. So what we do now is to compare the array value as we loop through each element, compare it with the high and the low number we have. If it's higher than the high, it becomes the high. And if it's lower than the current low, it becomes the new low. So we're going to have an if statement. If array marks the value in position I, if that is bigger than I high, then begin and end, then I high becomes that value, array marks position I. Okay, so if this element is higher than our current high value, then it replaces our current high value, and our I position of the high value is where we are at, so that is I. I is always the index in our for loop, the value in our for loop where we're at, so that tells us the position. And similarly, we can now do another if statement. So that was the end of the if statement. End of if statement. If. Now we do another if. If array marks position I, that's where we're at, if that is less than I low, if it's smaller than our current low value, then begin and end. What then? Then our low value must be replaced. Our low value gets this low value. If this element is lower than our current low value, our low value gets array marks position I. And our I position of our low value is I. Just the same thinking as when we had the low value, a high value. Right, so we'll go through the whole loop. This was the end of the second if statement. This was the end of the loop. And now we've done looping through our array, and we've got our high and low, and we need to calculate the range. Okay, I range would also be an integer. I range is I high minus I low. And now we can do all our output. Red out dot lines dot add. I'm just going to do this very briefly. High plus into string of I high, and red out dot lines dot add position of high plus into string of I, position high. I'm going to copy this and do it for the low as well. Low, position of the low, and then we also need to just display the range. So the range. Okay, everyone happy with that? Let's run and check. Let's display it. There's our average, there's our product. The high is 59, I'm comparing with the book, and it's position 1. The low is 14, and the position is 5, and the range is 45. So full marks to us for that. Okay, so make sure you remember the algorithm for how we do this. We take the first element to be the high as well as the low, and then we loop through the rest of the array, comparing that element with our current high and low value that we have, and replacing it if necessary. Right, we're almost done. Next step now is to calculate the percentage, where they say that these marks that we have are actually marks out of 60. So we must display the original mark and the rounded percentage calculated to 0 decimal places. Right, so okay, let's put out our heading, red out, dot lines, dot add, and then they want to have marks plus a #9, so we get a proper spacing, and percentage. Right, then we are going to loop, same as always, for I, going from 1 to 10, and we're going to loop. Let's do a begin and end, Control D. So let's say we want to now convert our number. Let's keep the mark as a variable that we get from our array, and our percentage, and they'll be integers because they said that we're going to round it. Usually percentage would be a real, but because we're going to round it to the nearest to 0 decimals, it's going to be an integer as well. So I mark is going to be array marks the element in position I. Right? Yeah, you should be clear with that. And then I percentage will get. Now, to calculate percentage, we take our mark and we times it. We divide it by what it counted out of, which was 60. So it was a mark out of 60, and then we times it by 100 to get it to a percentage. That's how we calculate percentage. We take our value, divide it by the total it was out of, times by 100. Right, but that's going to give us a decimal value. So let's round that. So we use the round function just to round that answer. And that's basically it. And now we've got to display it. Right, first goes the mark, which is into string of I number, and then the percentage, oops, not I num, I mark. Right, and then the percentage is going to also be int to string of I percentage. Let's do something else before we run this. I noticed from previous times that our output gets full and then we can't see the output, so let's just clear it first. Don't forget to do these small details. So if we display our values and we do all of our other stuff, now we want to show the percentage, so we want to start off with a clear output. So it's cleared, and then we get the mark and the percentage, and it is correct. Right, so there you have it. It's very easy, really. I hope it makes sense. So we loop through all the values in our array of marks. We get the mark at the current position. So array marks I goes into our variable I mark. We then take I mark, divide it by 60 times by 100 to convert it to a percentage, and then round it according to the instructions, and store it in a variable, and then display. Alright, grade 11s, please make sure you can do all of this. Super important, super easy once you get it, and it will guarantee you marks in any test or exam.